So, Paul, you just said something that reminded me of a kind of funny story. You had your slide about it's being where your audience is. And when I was at New England Journal of Medicine, one of the projects I worked on, it was probably in 06 or 07, was establishing their Facebook page. And at the time, Facebook was still relatively new, and there was a question as to whether a publication like the New England Journal of Medicine belonged on Facebook. And while we were scratching our heads about this, we discovered that in fact we were already on Facebook. There were multiple NEJM fan clubs, one in Spanish and one in English, run by a guy in Australia who had actually made himself an I Heart NEJM t-shirt. And then there was also a Facebook page that just said NEJM and had an older logo and had nothing to do with the actual journal. And so all of a sudden I said, well, geez, we're already on Facebook. We need to be here and control this and start experimenting with it. So you had that great slide showing, where your audience is. If a publisher isn't doing these things already, how do they find out where their audience is? Is that mic on? Yes, good.
That's a very good question, and I find it is extremely useful to have very good analytical tools, most of which are free, to go and to allow you to have keyword searches of your name. So if someone sneezes on one of these social groups, I want to know about it. And it's very, very important to set up alert systems so that you know if someone's using your publication's name or your society's name in a venue that you were completely unaware didn't exist. So LinkedIn is a classic example for the American Physical Society, which some of their members created a LinkedIn profile page before the society even knew LinkedIn existed. And so they had to have some discussions over who would get that LinkedIn page again.
Does anyone else want to add on that?
Defer to your...
Sure. So Daniel, I wanted to ask you, one of the interesting things about my community is how organic the growth has been. And you said that in many cases you're hands off and you're letting them do their own thing. But you also said that beyond 22 communities it becomes difficult to manage. So I'm curious to know, how hands on are you? Are you guys moderating the communities on my community? What's the staffing like?
Yeah, I mean basically there's about 2 to 4 people actively managing those sites, but also not just the sites but the people as well and the associated activity of the technical networks and so on. So it's not a huge number, it's not a big resource, to the point that what we absolutely wanted to create was something which was self-sustaining, and in fact one of the key activities for that group now is to actually write guidelines, benchmark against best practice, so that people who want to set up their own sites can do so. Obviously we'll watch what they do and make sure that it conforms in some way to something we would approve of. But I think, again, sort of being in control of all of that stuff is a bit 20th century, really. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're not in a position to moderate, but even if we were, I'm not sure that was something that we would really want to do. People are going to say what they want to say, and I think you have to let them get on with it by now.
Right, right. So I know with a lot of these things, it's there's an expression in new product development where when you have a new idea and you're trying to figure it out, it's instead of ready, aim, fire, it's ready, fire, aim. You go on and you try it, and then you see what's working and what's not working. I'm curious to know, have any of you found that there's that your assumptions about what was going to work were different, and if you had to retool your strategies on different in different community efforts?
The Twitter feed. So the very first time we created the Twitter feed, we were using it to push jobs out, and we had a long internal debate over whether we should stop pushing jobs out through the Twitter feed. And then we found out that it was a major form of engagement with our Twitter followers. They actually liked the jobs, and they would actually say, hey, there's a job going over here, and they would retweet it to amongst their friends. So even though it seemed a pretty inane thing to do, putting jobs out on a Twitter feed, it was actually very effective at building engagement. And there's two other quick points I wanted to make about an unexpected fallout from our efforts, and that is the quality of our unsolicited manuscript submissions has gone up dramatically. In the past, most of our unsolicited manuscripts were full of crackpots, like this is why Einstein is wrong, and we get one of those about every 2 weeks. Instead, we've found that we're getting much more high-quality editorial submissions, and we can't explain why, because they all know who we are anyway. So, but the only correlation between the increase in high-quality submissions has been our outreach efforts on these various platforms. And then finally, comments. The comments on Facebook, and there could be a lot. There's one post we did last week. 140,000 people saw it. There were 350 comments on that one post, even before I'd had breakfast. That's a pretty tough one to moderate. So generally we just quickly skim through and see if someone's used bad language or attacked someone, and we'll delete those and we'll leave the rest. But on the main website, the comments, unless we mention Wall Street Journal on climate change or cold fusion, the comments are generally have increased in quality, and again, it's a really nice way of engaging with our readers. And engagement is what we want to do. So.
Yeah, I would concur with that last point, absolutely. Is that one of the things that we set off doing was launching individual groups without necessarily making direct reference to the groups themselves as to whether that's something they wanted. And in fact, we actually had a KPI which actually related to the number of new communities that we actually created, which in retrospect was clearly a fairly foolish thing to do. So I think the answer is definitely in finding ways of actually tracking engagement. And I'm not entirely sure, I'd be interested in other people's views on this, what the best ways of doing that actually are. But it's definitely the quality of the relationship with those users that we should be actively seeking rather than the quantity.
Right. So, Michael, you're a newly minted CEO. If publishers aren't doing these kinds of things already and they're interested in an online community, how do you get management to go along with a project that is sort of by definition an experiment and it might be retooled? Is it a marketing effort? Is it product? Or is it R&D? I mean, how do you see this?
Well, if from my perspective, I would say if it's a new product, by definition, you want that new product proposal not just to include the money you're going to spend in producing the product itself, but for me, when I look at proposals, it's almost it's the other piece of it. It's okay, you built it. Now, what are you going to do with it? And so, I would expect in our world now that a component of that sales, promotion, marketing effort to actually do something with the thing you just invented would include a lot, if not all, of the things that we talked about today. You know, you would have components of the traditional marketing effort around promoting it that you would expect, but you would also probably want to have some of the social networking and social marketing tools that we talked about here. But I think in our world, we're also looking for products that have this kind of virtuous circle. So you produce something, your folks in the building produce it, and you put it out there. You hope through community that you start to generate some response from that. It's almost primary research. Comes back to the folks in the building, and they get to react to that and adjust and change, and then, you know, put it out again, and hopefully everybody starts to be very, very supportive of the product that you did. So that's the way I would think about this. A product proposal is not segmented. It is holistic. It has to have, you know, all aspects of what's going to make that product successful. That's the way I would look at it.
Okay, so another question I thought of while you guys were presenting. obviously we're interested in driving clicks, getting people to look at our content, and when we have the audience's attention, you want to let them know about content. And I was thinking about what, I like watching documentaries, and one of my favorites was one from a while ago called The Merchants of Cool, that was all about marketing to teenagers who are very consumed with cool. And one of the insights was that if you have something cool and you start marketing it really hard, it stops being cool. And so you have to find a balance there. And so, Paul, you were mentioning that Facebook changed their algorithm because to reward people for creating original content and not just promoting content. So I was wondering, like, how do you strike a balance between trying to promote content and get people talking about content, but also allowing the community to be organic and to take things in their own direction and not spoil the cool of your presence in that community?
I'm going to use this mic because it's a bit louder, I think.
Okay.
So one of we are always looking at Facebook and saying to ourselves, is this really worth the time and effort? Okay, there's 1.5 million people there, but show me the money. Where's the money? I need some subscribers here. And then we looked at more closely at the demographics, and it turns out that over 500,000 of those visitors or fans are from India. Then China is almost equal in terms of size on our Facebook presence. Then it's Iran and Pakistan. And these are all markets in which we're not really that well known. I mean, they know we exist, but there's no way for them to really engage with us outside of an institution. So we decided that it was worthwhile for us to continue these Facebook efforts simply because we're playing the patient, long-term game here. If we increase our brand awareness and access, get people associating us with high-quality content that's trustworthy, even when it's not from us, then that's going to pay off a lot further down the line when, say, the US isn't important anymore and China and India are. So.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a question.
Sorry.
We'll get to you in a second. Go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I was just going to say, I absolutely concur with what you were just saying. I mean, the growth in membership and in terms of groups that have formed in my community have been elsewhere than in the UK and European countries, specifically, for instance, in Sri Lanka. Now, I think, we don't know whether that's going to result in more sales, but I think we can assume that naturally building up a relationship with those people, if they're satisfied with what they get out of it, there's a good chance they're likely to react positively to things that we push in their direction. But I would be very cautious, and I would certainly be speaking on behalf of our membership department in saying we're very cautious about what we actually push to people, because we know from experience that they tend to react against being sold to, unless it's in an environment that they recognise as a sales environment. And I think that's one of the strengths of my community is very much, I think, that safe environment in which to do what engineers want to do, which is exchange ideas, talk to each other, maybe submit some content. But again, it does go back to this issue of rather than trying to teach our users what they should be doing, actually letting them do what they do and watching it. Yeah.
So we'll open up to questions. The gentleman in the back, you have a question?
I just wanted to follow up that since Facebook or China periodically blocks Facebook, do you have an idea of how the Chinese users are accessing Facebook? And any plans for going around that and using Chinese users?
Did everyone hear the question?
Yeah. Mobile. As you probably suspected, mobile and tablet. And this actually goes back to, I mentioned earlier that you shouldn't be afraid to terminate projects. So we used to have 4 email alerts, and we terminated 3 of them and reinvented a new one because we noticed that as everyone else in the room earlier was on their mobile device checking their email, we decided that we needed to go and re-evaluate what our email newsletter products were.
so that it was more suitable for someone reading on a phone. And we immediately found that 39% of our email lists were actually reading the email on the phone, and traffic to our website from mobile and tablets devices doubled overnight. So,
Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I saw that you alluded to get it and dig it and stuff and stumbling on. I noticed you have a Reddit for Physics Today, and I just wanted to know how you approach that, because that community can be quite secretive and very self-policing, so I wondered how you managed to get traction there.
and touchy.
Yeah.
We asked nicely. That was basically all it took. We asked nicely, can we have a forum? And we're very, very careful, again, what we post in there, because even though they're a subset of our audience and they meet the requirements that we're looking for, we don't want to upset anyone, because they can get very, very antsy if you upset them. But generally, it's worked out to be quite a nice experiment. Half the time, we're not even the ones posting our content there. It's the Reddit user groups who are doing so, which is great, yeah, because that means that they're the ones engaged again with us. So.
Yes, sir.
Well, as an electrical engineer, I just love the fact that the word cool is being used in conjunction with engineering and physics. My question is for Michael. You had a slide that talked about some of the reasons that these communities are being formed. Do you have any metrics or qualitative information as to how many organizations are achieving these goals and to what degree?
I don't recall that being part of it. Certainly would look at again. But as I said, I think what we would like to do, there was only 15 questions here. So I think as we get more sophisticated and want to look at this area in a deeper way, that we'll be expanding that, and those are the types of questions that we would probably want to ask, certainly, and get a little bit more behind the motivation and the success of what we're seeing.
Yes?
I have a question for Paul or any of the panelists about maintaining and growing an audience in these various channels. Paul, you had a slide with these massive numbers on Facebook, and I keep hearing anecdotally that younger users are moving away from Facebook, and I'm curious if you agree with that, and if so, how that impacts your strategy for the future.
We're not seeing that for our audience, that they're very quite closely stuck between the 18 to 24 range, with I'm afraid to say, a 70-30 split in the male-female ratio. But we, again, as I initially stated, you've got to go to where your audience is, and if our audience moved elsewhere, or the people we wanted to reach move elsewhere, then we will move with them. But we've been trying, this is why it's really important to keep an eye on what trends are going on at any one time. And also, as I said near the beginning, is that channel worthwhile to you? Like Snapchat. I can't see any reason why would we use Snapchat. We've had some ideas on how we would use Pinterest, but in terms of payoff, because we have a small staff, we can't see the point at the moment. That's not to say I'll be singing a different tune next year.
I have a theory on Facebook losing the interest of younger people, which is that, and this is just coming from my gut, but that the utility of Facebook is much stronger after you've graduated from high school and your friends are no longer right there around you. You know, when you're in high school, you don't need Facebook because everybody's right there, and so I guess time will tell if that's true. If the drop-off continues after the young people right now age out, and, we'll see. Yes?
I have a question that conferences, especially subject area conferences, is a really great opportunity to kind of put, faces to names, faces to handles. And so I was just wondering if you had any examples of things that you've done at, a physics meeting or an engineering meeting to kind of not just drive traffic to booths, but things that you did at the booth that maybe kind of helped these initiatives.
I can't answer that question directly, but one of the things that is clearly useful from that perspective is the fact that we have a video activity associated with most of our meetings. So that content is made available through IETTV, which is a separate channel at the moment, but it's something that we're going to both integrate into our overall offering on the digital library, and also we'll be using to follow up conferences in particular, providing snippets of content that will actually encourage people to go and look at that, the full rendition, if you like. And also, as I was mentioning in the presentation, use that as a way of actually trying to identify topics and people who have actually contributed well to what we're doing, because it's on the basis of repeating that experience and refining it that we'll end up having more successful conferences, I believe.
There's another question in the front?
That's good enough.
Oh, I'm sorry, you wanted to say something else, Paul?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, different physicists, well, different fields of physics react differently to different social media channels. So the astronomers are the chattiest bunch I've ever met on Twitter at their meetings. So it's a little bit similar to what we've seen on Twitter with this particular meeting, but multiply that by 10 and you'll have an idea of what astronomers are like. So there's huge discussions about the slides, about the data, and we will go and chip in and ask questions and get feedback. What is the best paper that came out this morning at this meeting? And people will respond back and say, this is the stuff you should be concentrating on. It's very, very valuable if you're trying to find news. But it's also, again, very useful for engagement. Now, the APS meetings, 2 years ago, this is the American Physical Society, 2 years ago, the most interesting tweet they had was, the meeting in room 115 has been moved to 117. And that was it. And this time around, it's got a bit more, there's been a bit more discussion on it, but again, nowhere near like the astronomers. But they have started posting pictures. I noticed Emma at the back there has been, wave Emma. She has been posting pictures of her badge all throughout this meeting, with a long stream of attached to it. It's a very simple way of getting people to engage with you. Even if you're doing something like just adding little lists of stickers to the back of your badge, I bet that her pictures will probably be best remembered from this meeting than anything else that you've probably seen.
So years ago at Book Expo, I remember a vendor actually ran, I wouldn't call it promotion, but they organized an event at their booth for tweeters and bloggers, and, based on all the followers for that particular site, and then promoted it to folks so they could bring people there, and they offered, I think it was beers or something at the booth for an hour after the show ended to get that community pulled together. And to your point, with people's handles, you often that it's not Michael Cairns, it's something else, right? So you don't necessarily associate a person with their handle unless you actually meet them physically and they introduce themselves that way. So this was kind of funny because we got to see the people that we had been talking to through Twitter and put their face to their name, and it was kind of fun. I haven't seen very many people do that though. It's an interesting exercise. I thought it was fun.
Sorry.
Question for Daniel.
Yeah.
Of your 24,000 people who use the site,
Yeah.
what sort of, how big is the cohort of really active users making contributions?
I can't honestly answer that question directly. I mean, inevitably you're going to have that, 1%, 9%, and the rest. I think the issue for us, I mentioned earlier on, one of the things that we will want to be looking at, and it'd be interesting to hear anybody's thoughts on this, is ways in which you can assess the quality of engagement. Because I don't think necessarily the people that actually say the most or post the most are necessarily contributing the most. It's only going to be if those things are useful in some way, which is why I think this idea of rewards is probably part of the solution, because you know, if you can get people to be recognised for the contribution they've made, and you know, you can make that apparent, I think that would be a very good way of actually building up the number of contributors who really contribute, rather than people who just make a lot of noise.
I think what was this post useful?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, getting feedback on that. As I say, we haven't got any firm plans, and I would be very interested in hearing after the meeting, perhaps anybody's experience of actually trying to implement something like that.
Yes.
How do organizations respond to negative feedback on social media or your
The question was about negative feedback. How do you respond?
Do you want to go?
I'm not aware that we've had too much. I think part of the answer is not to, in a way. I mean, you know, we have certainly had some negative feedback, and it has been, in some cases, quite widely broadcast. We actually had some in China, and we ultimately came to the conclusion that the dangers inherent in actually trying to respond with a sensible answer were much greater than just letting the thing ride, you know, go its natural course and die away, which is exactly what it did. But I can't say that we've had a lot of experience of that act, so I don't know whether you want to add.
It depends on what the negative feedback is about. So I'm sure half the people in this room, probably more than half, had negative feedback about the performance of a website sooner or later. Like I had problems logging in, why can't I post this comment? I tried to submit something to you and it didn't happen. That sort of negative feedback you can usually fix quite easily by, first of all, apologizing, B, fixing the problem, and C, this is the thing which I found really, really invaluable, and I recommend it as a technique to anyone, and that is to invite them to be part of a beta group, an exclusive beta group, where if you have any problems or if you're doing any improvements to your website or to your product at a later date, that you can approach them and ask them to see an exclusive preview of what solution or what it is that we fixed. So since we started this policy, I have about 250 people now. I can drop them an email or do a Skype call with and ask them to test something out and get almost instant feedback. And people love this. They absolutely love it because they think, you are listening to me and you understand my concerns. And it's been so useful because it means that if my colleagues at AIP Publishing, they're the subsidiary that does most of our journal publishing with publishing technology, if they need a series of beta testers, I can say, well, I've got a list of names. If these people said you can contact them on these issues, if you so wish. And I can just pass that on, and it's been very useful. Now, if it's editorial feedback, that's a different kettle of fish. With that, we tend to pass it on to the editors, some of whom get very upset, some of whom do not, and then we respond backwards. Sometimes it will be, well, thank you for your concern, we'll look into it in the future, but the fact that you just simply say thank you is enough usually to get them off your back. Now on Facebook, sometimes we just have to delete and occasionally we have to block someone, but having to block 2 or 3 people out of 1.5 million is, I can live with those odds.
And somewhat along the same lines, but we mentioned O'Reilly earlier, and one of the things that O'Reilly has done or did many years ago was recognize that they had power users, and some of those power users didn't want to wait until that manual on Microsoft Office 2014 was out, but they were willing to pay to see a chapter-by-chapter, unedited almost, version of the book as it was being produced. And that engaged that community in this feedback. It satisfied these users' need to get that information as quickly as they could, but it also, again, that circle I talked about before, provided feedback back to the editorial staff or the writer about what was working in that book and what wasn't. That same group ultimately ended up, for the most part, buying the finished book at the end of the process. So again, it's one of those elements of Riley's experimentation in building that community and pulling those groups together. It's really, really interesting. You should look at, there's probably many presentations on SlideShare about what O'Reilly has done over the years, because it's probably a case study that might go back 10 years, so.
Great. Are there other questions? I thought I saw a few more hands. Okay, well, here's a tricky one. We have a few more minutes, and I don't know if any of you will have an answer for this. But I've worked on projects where we have created an online community. We've gotten good engagement from a reasonably moderate-sized audience, maybe not as big as was hoped at the beginning of the project. But ultimately, it wasn't a successful project for the organization. How do you back out of it? How do you pull the plug on a community when you have an audience that is maybe disappointingly small but really engaged? Is that something that you've had to deal with at all?
Yeah, that is definitely something that we have had to deal with, and actually the easiest way of doing it is to try to find an alternative space which is associated with a successful community. Yeah, that's simply put. Clearly, that isn't going to satisfy everybody, but it is an alternative, and it's probably better than just saying we're going to pull the plug, which is not something that we would tend to do, and that's a very good reason.
We sent them all an individual letter, because in that particular instance, the community was so small we could do that, and they were fine with it. So but they understood that we, as I said at the beginning, they know we have limited resources, and they know we have to concentrate on what we can do to provide the best experience for everybody. So, your community, your audience, is usually a lot more forgiving and a lot more understanding than you realize. So it comes as a nice, pleasant surprise.
Any other questions? Okay, we just have a few minutes left. So what's next? Do you have any thoughts on where you might want to take the communities that you already have? And then maybe this is a related question. You talked about some of the unexpected audiences and maybe unexpected verticals and demographics that you've been engaging with online. Does that inform product development in any way?
Well, I identified at the beginning of my slide set the sector profiles that we have. So one of the things that we definitely want to do is to encourage new groups to form in those areas where the IET is not necessarily regarded as the ultimate repository of information and knowledge. And actually, in experience suggests, so in the healthcare technology area being a good example, they have, in some cases, become some of the most active groups. So how you do it, I think, does ultimately come down to what the group is, because they do tend to have very distinct personalities. But I think the process of allowing those groups to form is one that we are constantly learning about. And as I mentioned, we're also trying to put together some guidelines so that rather than us having to tell people how you would go about doing it, we have something available for them to refer to. And the people who are actually managing that are obviously becoming more skilled at trying to set those groups up successfully.
I think for us it's time to do another set of focus groups, because as I mentioned earlier, it's very useful. Focus groups are useful, but they're only useful if you can keep doing them. If you and it's best to do it over a 2-3 year period. So it's been 2 years since the last one. Mobile phones, tablets have shot off even more than they were back then. So I think if I was a guessing and a betting man, I would say that our next product development for community use would be something very closely tied to mobile. But what it is, I haven't got the faintest idea yet. But
All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank our speakers. They've given us a lot to think about, and I want to thank all of you for your questions. And that concludes the presentation, so thank you very much.